As kids, we all wondered the same questions, or at the very least, all of my fellow nerds and I did. What gives us the abilities to walk and talk and breathe, to learn and love and hope and dream? Now, obviously, all of these are very unique and complex processes, but they all do also have something in common, which is that none of them could occur without the neuron. Hi, my name is Sophia, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about the basics of neurons and interneural communication. So this is a neuron, and it looks pretty complicated, and it is, but in order to understand the basics of how neurons communicate, you don't need to know every detail. In fact, it can be reduced down into an image that's a lot more like this. Pretty much, you need to understand that there are three parts: the dendrites, the soma, and the axon, and the basics of how these three parts work. So today we're going to start with the soma, and this is the cell body, and it's where genetic information is held, and it provides structure, and it's also the place in the cell where action potentials, which are these neural electrical signals, are generated. So in order to understand this, it's important to understand that every cell has a membrane potential, which is a measurement of the interior of the cell relative to the exterior. A resting neuron has a membrane potential of around -70 millivolts. But due to neurotransmitters binding, and we will go over that part more later, this can shift. And if it makes it all the way down to -55 millivolts, this huge change happens within the cell, which is the action potential being generated. A bunch of positively charged ions flood the cell, and the membrane potential actually makes it all the way up to +40 millivolts. And that brings us to the next structural part of the neuron, which is known as the axon. So this action potential, this wave of positive charge, will travel down the axon of the neuron, and it'll increase the charge of each area one at a time. When it reaches the end, it reaches something known as the terminal buttons, and that looks a little something like this. A bunch of chemicals known as neurotransmitters are stored here, and when an action potential hits, it triggers the release of these neurotransmitters into a space between neurons, which is known as the synapse. Because neurons are so tightly packed together, these neurotransmitters would be able to be very quickly picked up by the dendrites of a neighboring neuron. And these dendrites have special receptors on them such that neurotransmitters can bind. Depending on the neurotransmitter, this next neuron may be more or less likely to fire an action potential. And that brings us right back to the beginning. The human body has billions and billions of neurons, and it is these connections that act as a basis for our abilities to speak and breathe and learn and love. And I, for one, find that pretty incredible.